Supporting you in your dog parenting journey. The Dynamic Dog Owner with Debbie Potter. Hello and welcome to the Dynamic Dog Owner, the podcast designed to support you, the dog parent, in your dog parenting journey. Hopefully giving you an insight into the world of dogs and different perspectives, thoughts and ways to improve life between you and your dog. So today we're going to be talking about a really controversial topic that has a lot of divided opinion, and you may have found yourself on the point of going, which one should I go for? Collar versus harness. Now, years ago, I've had dogs for, in my entire life, basically. So 40 years. Shocking. I don't feel that old. So years ago, we never had harnesses for dogs. And I look back at a lot of the things we did with our dogs when I was younger, growing up, before I became in the dog world. And I actually go, oh my goodness, how did we do that? What were we doing? But of course, there's this wonderful saying, and it's something my dad would always say when I was growing up, that you can only do what you know at the time, and you can only make decisions based on the information you have at the time. And in that moment, it's the best decision to make. We don't know what we don't know. And obviously back in, the 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s, we hadn't heard of harnesses for dogs. What were we on about? My first dog as an adult didn't have a harness. He only had a collar. He came with a collar. But then as I learnt more and as I experienced a couple of issues around his collar, he switched to a harness, probably around when he was about 6 or 7, maybe. Can't remember. And ever since then, all my dogs are on harnesses, and I fully advocate the use of harnesses. And this is the thing of, just because I say now this is what I think you should do, it doesn't mean it's what I've always done, but I have learnt from experience and life and from more education, and obviously then I like to pass that on. It's part of my job. So traditionally, as I say, years ago, dogs were always walked on a collar, and it's normal, perfectly normal to see a dog on choke chains, like the metal tightening chains. Sadly, even now we see them on lots of other devices around their neck, none of which I would recommend. Harnesses were always, it was assumed that harnesses were for sled dogs, working dogs that pulled stuff. And that is kind of where I think the idea that your dog will pull more on a harness because they can pull into it, that's where the myth has come from. But if you actually stop and think about it, why were sled dogs in harnesses? Because they knew that they couldn't pull hard against their neck because it would strangle them, or cause a lot of pain and discomfort, and they wouldn't be able to pull hard enough. So that kind of links into obviously what we see today of that collars can cause a lot of damage to dogs. Things have progressed now, and we see, I would say it's more than 50%. I would say it's higher. I would say it's at least 75% of dogs wearing harnesses. Although actually I think that's probably dropping because unfortunately the tides are changing for the worse. But generally speaking, a good dog trainer, the good dog training world is now promoting kind, ethical methods that are backed by science theories, and ensure that we teach dogs without using pain, force, intimidation. And therefore, that camp of people will use harnesses. And obviously, there are arguments to believe why dogs pull in more harnesses, and we're going to talk about that. But first of all, let's talk about why I don't agree with collars. So obviously collars, have a collar. Many people have a collar and they leave it on their dogs. That's absolutely fine. Personally, I don't actually have my dogs in collars. I've recently bought them collars. So up until probably a year ago, 18 months ago, they didn't actually own a collar. In the house, my dogs are naked because it's what I prefer. Dave had a collar when he was young, but after 18 months, we got rid of it and we didn't have it anymore because he actually pulled down a cabinet by getting his collar stuck on it. Thankfully, it was loose enough that it went over his head and he could get out of it. So collars, the purpose of a collar in this day and age is to have a permanent ID on your dog. A way of just being able to hold on to them, hang on to them. If you're opening the front door, if you need to just stop them from doing something quickly, you can slip a finger onto their collar and hold it gently. And obviously their tag is attached to it. You don't have to have a collar when you're in the house. The law says that as soon as you step out in public, you have to have a collar and a harness on a collar and a tag on your dog. But the law is quite outdated and it hasn't been reworded for a long time. Harness and tag suffice. They only need a collar to be able to have the tag attached. So Whether you have one in the house or not is completely your personal preference. I don't, because I think with a multi-dog house, Dave obviously pulled that thing down. Leaving dogs in crates with collars on, absolute no, because they can cause damage, get it caught, etc. I personally wouldn't leave a dog unattended with a collar on. But for me, living in a multi-dog household, my dogs are always playing, play fighting, not like in a nasty way, but in natural dog communication, always like mouthing at each other and just having good canine interaction with each other. It would be so easy for them to accidentally catch a tooth under a collar, get stuck on it and have an accident. So that's why personally in a multi-dog household, I don't have collars, because my dogs do play and interact with each other quite a lot. So we're actually talking about collars and having leads attached to collars and walking your dog with the attachment on the collar. So why wouldn't I suggest walking on a collar? Purely because your dog's neck is so valuable, but also really, really fragile. There's a lot of important stuff that goes through a dog's neck. All you have to think about is yourself. Same principle applies. If we tighten against something against our neck, if we push against the front of our neck, we know it feels sensitive. We know it hurts. We know from, obviously what we know in life, that if you tie something around your neck and there is force, you are going to strangle yourself, or someone is going to strangle you. Therefore, the exact same thing applies to your dog. So let's think about like the actual what's going on in your dog's neck. You've obviously got their part of their spine, the neck part. Obviously, I'm not very good at remembering official names. I'm really shit at remembering like exactly what each body part is called, for example, and remembering certain facts and big fancy words. Partly why I'm really good at doing the podcast and talking to you on a sort of more dog owner level, because I don't remember big words. They go in, they go out, but I remember the concept. So I'm not going to be using big fancy words, but basically you've got the spine part, the bone of their neck coming through their neck, obviously. You've got muscles. Obviously the whole of the body is covered with muscles, but you've also got glands, nodes. The thyroid glands were quite an important one. The trachea, or trachea, however you say it. Everyone says it and pronounces it different. You've got arteries, you've got veins, you've got their esophagus. So all of the important stuff, a lot of it is housed in your dog's neck, because obviously brain feeding body. When we have a collar around that and it tightens or is under pressure, all of that sort of stuff in your dog's neck, the biology of your dog's neck, all of that makeup is compromised in some way. It's often why you'll find that your dog, and this is why I stopped using one with Leo many moons ago, because he occasionally, if we were on holiday or somewhere new, he'd pull. He'd never really pulled on a lead. You've heard me talk on the podcast before, he was a perfect dog, like literally perfect. But occasionally if we were on holiday, he'd pull towards something and then he'd choke a little bit and like cough. And I was like, I don't know about that. And obviously I was 21 when I got Leo, so I was young. I'd lived with dogs all my life, but I was very young in terms of taking on role of a dog. And so, me and my husband, or he wasn't my husband at the time, but me and my husband were learning how to look after a dog. I didn't realise that was because he kept pulling on his neck. I just thought he'd caught his throat. But it's because we were using a collar. And that's why after a couple of years, we switched to using a harness for his own good. But, that is why dogs will cough. A lot of dogs, you've probably seen it. You think, why are you pulling? This must hurt. Dogs will continue to pull into pain. They have a much higher pain threshold than us. And they very much, you guys know, your dogs are very impulsive and they act in the moment. They're opportunists. They see an opportunity, they take it, they think second. So they don't think, oh, look, there's a lovely smell there. I won't pull because it might cause damage to my neck. They go, wow, lovely smell. Pull, 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 pull. And then after they've done, go, oh, blimey, that hurt. My neck's a bit sore now. That's how they operate. So they don't stop and think, oh, I won't pull because it hurts. Which is why dogs will continue to pull in a collar or anything else as well. And obviously we're going to talk about the differences of that in a sec. So your dog's throat is incredibly vulnerable. And we underestimate how vulnerable it is. And obviously collars, as we've said, can cause some issues. So they can actually create or worsen many physical conditions. To name a few, obviously you could damage their windpipe. So the trachea can put under pressure and it can collapse if they're excessive pullers. You've got eye problems because it can creating tension around the neck can create pressure in the head and make pressure in the eyes, so it can create eye issues. You've obviously got brachycephalic dogs who struggle to breathe anyway because they already have a shortened snout, and a lot of the brachycephalic breeds have been bred to have even more issues and smaller, narrower windpipes, etc. So they will suffer even more. You've obviously got, if your dog's got a sensitive throat, say they've had an infection or kennel cough or something like that, then that's going to be weakened anyway, and then we're irritating it more. If they've had surgery, if they've got thyroid disorders, all of those things can be created, but they can also be caused by pressure around the throat. And obviously you've got, let's think about the actual more sciencey and how it affects behaviour. You can obviously limit blood flow. You can affect the neural pathways going from brain to head. You can restrict oxygen intake, which obviously then the brain can't function properly and the body can't function properly. So it's more than just, your dog doesn't like it or it stops them pulling. It stops them pulling because of all these reasons. Generally speaking, people will say, my dog pulls less on a collar. Yeah, because it bloody hurts. After a while, they have all of this irritation or they have issues. And it's not necessarily about excessive pulling. If your dog isn't a puller, and many dogs, a lot of people will say, well, I don't need to worry because my dog never pulls on the lead. Cool, but what about that one time? What about if that one time they see a rabbit, or one time you start walking different direction, haven't realised they're following you and you pull on their collar? It's not about excessive or repetitive sort of exposure to pressure around the neck. It could be one tug, one impact, if it's big enough, can cause all these issues. So my question is always, why risk it? What's the point? So then you look at a harness. Well, how's a harness different? Obviously we're going to talk about loads of different aspects of why the harness is different, but why is the harness different in general? A harness doesn't put pressure on your dog's neck. If you've got, or their throat or any part of their that kind of system, if you've got a good, well-fitted harness, and that's another topic, there are so many different harnesses to pick. If you've got a good, well-fitted harness, they're actually designed to alleviate pressure from any of the dog's throat, and to minimise pain and discomfort as much as possible, but also make sure it gives free movement of bones, joints, leg muscles, shoulder movement. They're designed to give a full sort of range of movement, or as much as possible, obviously, minimal impact. Some of them become padded, some are more comfortable material than others, some are thicker. Obviously, you can still get thin ones aren't great. But our aim is that a harness limits the pressure on the neck. Basically, I always say avoids the soft squishy bits, and sits on the more firm part of the body and ensures your dog has full range of movement. So therefore, we're protecting the neck and we're ensuring they can move. So a lot of people will then say, well, dogs can pull more on a harness. Yes, they do tend to pull more on a harness, but ask yourself the question, why? Why do they pull more? Because it doesn't hurt. And surely you would prefer your dog's walk to be enjoyable and comfortable than to be painful. So we're going to carry on talking about this. A lot of people will use then other methods. You've got your head collars, your slip collars, not just a flat collar, but your choke chains and all of that. They work, again, always ask yourself the question why, because they inflict pain or discomfort in some way. Often you'll see a dog walking on a device like that and you go, they're really well behaved, but look at their body language. Do they look happy? Do they look relaxed? Are they enjoying their experience? Possibly not, because again, they've been taught to walk nicely by pain and discomfort rather than my dog wanting to walk nice. So on a harness, yes, your dog is likely to pull more, but it's because they are free to. There is no pain or discomfort stopping them from pulling. So yes, it's a bit more of a challenge, but surely we'd prefer them to be more comfortable. It's a no-brainer. You may disagree. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer. Of course, I want my dog to be comfortable and not in pain or discomfort. Now, harnesses, you've probably seen, if you go into a shop, there are bloody hundreds of them. All different ones, shapes, sizes, thicknesses. Which one do you pick? What do you look for? Not all harnesses are equal. There are, I say, so many. I have a few brands that I go, these are the ones I love. And sadly, the one I love, my dog's body shape isn't right for, which is really annoying. But we have like the next best one, and I really like the harnesses I currently use. So different types of harnesses. Let's look at kind of, again, why they're not all as equal. You do need to look for a properly well-fitted, comfortable harness, because you've got harnesses that do the same thing as the collar and they tighten. So you've got really thin harnesses that are a bit like a cheese wire around your dog's body. Obviously, they're going to hurt, so they're going to pull a little bit more. You've also got ones that have a bar across the front. Now, they restrict movement, so they actually will reduce your dog pulling much more. Well, it depends how you look at it, but potentially more safely, because they're not putting pressure around the neck, but they are limiting movement. So if you've got one of the harnesses that's got a bar that kind of goes across the chest and across like the front of the legs, they will reduce your dog's pulling massively. I'm not saying don't use them. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. I'm not saying don't use them, but I'm saying be aware of why they stop your dog pulling. My big thing is, maybe this is like an autistic ADHD brain, I don't know, but why? I always want to know the why. Why does that work? Why do we do it that way? Why? Because I understand it. And this is why I like to pass on the why. If you've got a bar across the front, it will stop, they're sold as anti-pull harnesses. It will reduce your dog's pulling. It's not going to stop it altogether, but it will reduce it because you're effectively limiting how far they can stretch their legs. Because if you've got a bar across your shoulders, you can't fully extend. It would be like me tying a piece of string or a piece of rubber band around your knees and saying, let's go for a walk. You can do it, you can walk, you just can't stride as much as you normally would, and therefore you take smaller steps and you naturally don't walk as quick. And that's effectively what a bar harness does for a dog. It takes away their stride and therefore they pull less because they're not walking as quickly. Now, sounds brilliant, but let's look at the long-term consequence of that. If you're using one on an odd occasion, it's fine, you can get away with it. If you're using one every single day, forever, for all the time, they're running in it, walking in it, their body is always being restricted. And therefore we know, you guys will know if you've injured anything ever, that there's referred pain, or, you say, for example, you compensate. So say, for example, like years ago, I hurt my knee and I compensated for a good while it healed. I then had a dodgy hip. And then about 10 years later, I then injured the same ankle. And again, I had to compensate for a long time. Oh God, it took ages to heal. For probably about a year or two, I had to compensate for my ankle. And now I have a really dodgy hip because of my ankle. So I have to go to a chiropractor to fix my hip because my ankle caused my hip. My ankle's fine now, not a problem. But the constant compensation of how I was walking has then affected something else in my body. Exactly the same thing will happen to your dog. So they'll start having referred pain and issues. So ideally, we want a harness that is able to provide full movement of body. Now, occasionally, and I'm not going to lie, I never lie. I will never not tell you I do something if I do it. I do have a bar harness for my dogs. And the only time I use it is if, one, I'm injured. So, for example, when I hurt my ankle and I couldn't walk, I could barely walk for a few months. I was at a trampoline park and I was jumping over a bar showing off to my kids, and then I missed and the bar hit my leg. I thought I'd broken my ankle. Oh my God, it was so much pain. And it took probably about 6 years to heal. So yeah, don't show off in front of your kids. So for that time, I still had to walk my dog. I still had to take him places. So for a short period of time, he used the bar harness. He's a big, strong dog, so I didn't have the strength to hold him back or to hold on to him if he wanted to get somewhere. My mum will use a bar harness on my dogs if she has to take one out. So rarely she does, but if she has to like take, one of my dogs doesn't wee in the garden, so if she ever has to take him around the block, she'll use a bar harness, because again, their strength versus, you know, his strength is way stronger than hers. She doesn't feel in control. If he were, for example, I mean, he doesn't pull again, but if he saw something, if he wanted to pull, she knows she couldn't hold him back, but she can in the bar harness. So I'm talking like once in a blue moon. Now recently, when I was on holiday this year, I did actually use the bar harnesses on two of my dogs, because we were walking up and down hills. My husband had hurt his back. He has a recurring back issue. God, it sounds like we're like falling apart, doesn't it? It's me talking about my hip and my ankle and my knee. Me, his back. God, when you get to a certain age. Anyway, he'd hurt his back at work just before we went away. He didn't want to exasperate it. So he was like, I'm not going to hold the dogs. And I was like, okie doke. I'll hold them both. That's fine. I know I can. But again, if we're going down a hill, because we were in the Lake District, lots of hills. If we're going down a hill, if, you know, a sheep suddenly appears very, very close, I know one of them will ignore, but the other one might pull. I can't hold them both. Two dogs, you know, they're between them. Those two are probably about 65 kilograms. I can't physically hold them back if my footing's in the wrong place. If I'm going down a hill, the likelihood of me being able to hold them back is slim to none. Therefore, for that week, when we took those two dogs out together, the two bigger ones, they were both on a bar harness, because I had to hold them both and I wanted to be in control of any situation, and it was a just in case. When we took them one at a time, because I like taking my dogs out one at a time. I've talked about this many times on the podcast before. I love taking my dogs out one at a time because it's one-on-one time. So I will take my dogs out one-on-one, even when we're on holiday, because A, it's more enjoyable for me because I get to focus on individual dog. We go on different walks depending on what dog needs what. Because obviously they're all slightly different. So the times we took them together, which was those two, probably I can't remember how many times, but not many. Does it matter? For that one odd time, it's not going to cause a massive issue. They all see a chiropractor. If it did put anything out of alignment, she'll fix it next time she sees them. So it's not a major issue. But I'm saying that, so those things are there, but I would always think about short-term use or striving to use them less and using a well-fitted harness more as your training progresses. So sometimes we have to use things that we don't necessarily fully agree with, but they're a means to an end. And we might, if a dog is excessive puller, for example, we might start with a harness that helps us to achieve. And the aim is then, as our training history comes in, we reduce the the piece of equipment we're not overly keen on using and increase the one we do want to, and that's a nice way of doing things. Now the thing with anything, you know, any device, is that it only works while your dog's wearing it. Now people think that a harness will make your dog pull. It doesn't. Yes, people will use a number of different devices to stop your dog pulling, but you take that device off and they're going to pull exactly the same as they did before. It's not about the equipment. It's about the training and the motivation for pulling and what we do about it. But on a harness, a well-fitted harness, we're just making sure that our dog is safe whilst we are doing so. So what do you look for in a harness? As I said, there's so blooming many out there. For me, you're looking for a comfortable design that's least restrictive. Ideally, a Y shape at the front, because then it sits more on the bone structure and down the sort of sturdier bits of the body and avoids the soft, squishy parts of the neck. The straps should be wide and comfortable. They shouldn't be thin. Some of them are fleece lined. So, for example, Perfect Fit are lovely fleece line harnesses. They are my go-to. They're my fave. But you're also looking for one that's sort of got an H. I'd say an H, more of a K, sort of K fitting on the back, whereby the sort of like the pointy bit of the K would sit towards your dog neck, and then the sort of tall first bit of your K would be across the dog's back. That way it's providing a nice shape to go down over the neck, but it's also sitting far enough back because it's a K with kind of like a little line, like an H and a K combined. That sounds so random. I haven't described that very well, have I? But that means that there's a gap between the front and the back bit, which means there's room for the shoulder to move. So that's why I say sort of H/K shape on the back. And you're also looking for one that fits, like in terms of how tight it is, it fits well. A lot of harnesses are too big. And they slip and slide around, which obviously can cause some rubbing and discomfort. They should be quite snug, but still provide movement. And the straps should be thin. So some harnesses, again, they're so thick that they're almost like too restrictive. So you're looking for not like cheese wire thin, not like so big and bulky that your dog can't move, but kind of somewhere in between. So for an example, my dogs, who are all Labrador, Golden Retriever, so they're like 30 something kilograms up to 41. So big dogs, the thickness of their harness is around 2 inches. That's kind of like the perfect 2 inches. No, it's probably less than that. About an inch and a half is the thickness of their harness. So that's kind of the thickness we're looking at. Nothing too big and bulky, but nothing too thin. And just think, ladies, you'll understand me who are listening. It should be like your favourite bra. It should feel comfortable. You don't want anything poking, prodding, moving, slipping, digging in. Your harness should be exactly like that. So that's kind of the vibe we're looking for in a harness. And obviously, if they're I know this sounds really random, but if your dog is comfortable, they're actually likely to pull less. So we often think, oh no, that harness couldn't possibly do anything. But if you actually just get a good, well-fitted, lovely harness where your dog's pressure and weight as they walk is evenly distributed, if they pull into it, it's even rather than pulling on one part of them, they're actually going to feel safe, feel more snug. And just a new harness that looks and feels beautiful is actually potentially going to start reducing your pulling straight away. Obviously, it's not going to do magic. It's not going to suddenly like ping, because that doesn't work. But it's going to be the first step for your dog to go, oh, I don't need to pull against this because I'm trying to get away from the discomfort or the moving around of it. The long-term thing, the only thing that's ever going to work to reduce your dog's pulling is training. A harness doesn't make them pull. A collar might make them pull a bit more, but if they do, it's going to hurt. So, as I mentioned before, even if your dog doesn't pull, it's still a good idea to put them on a harness. Maximum safety, maximum comfort. And I think safety of a harness, again, is something we overlook. We, for example, in puppy class, last week we were doing our confidence building course where there are some obstacles where the dogs, puppies come up off the floor. So they step over things that are, potentially a couple of foot off the ground. A harness helps you with safety. You can hold on to that harness gently or the lead closer to the harness. If your dog slips, you're not hanging them by their neck if they slip, you're holding their body. I've had it before where a dog has fallen into water and had high sides they can't get out of. On a collar, if I pull on that, it's going to bloody choke them. Or it's going to slip off over their head as I try and pull them out. But I have pulled a dog out of deep water by their harness. Very, very grateful that dog had a harness on. It wasn't one of my dogs. It was a dog I was out on a walk with. But very grateful the dog had a harness on because I could grab hold of the harness and pull them out because the harness supports their body rather than their neck. And I say, even if it's just that occasional jerk towards a smell, you're still going to protect them. You're protecting that neck all the time. So what should you do? If you've always used a collar and you've never invented into a harness, try it. Promise you will see a difference. Yes, it may make your dog pull more, but remember, they're pulling because it doesn't hurt. And that's the big factor. If you've got a harness, just have a look at it. Does it kind of meet that tick box? Are the straps the right width? Does it have the Y on the front? Does it have the H/K on the back? Is it comfortable? Does it have the bar across the front that we don't really like because it's going to restrict movement? Nothing wrong with having two different harnesses, one for one occasion, one for another. If you need advice on what harness is good, speak to your local trainer. Now, obviously, ideally, a modern, ethical trainer rather than one who would suggest aversive methods because they'll just tell you not to wear a harness. That's because it's easy not to wear a harness and it's easier to just make your dog behave through pain and discomfort. Obviously, if you want to get into our Facebook group, send a picture of your dog in a harness. We'll tell you what we think. Not a problem. And the only thing, so think of it, the argument is collars make dogs pull less, harnesses make dogs pull more. Absolute rubbish. The only thing that will make your dog not pull is comfort, connection, communication. The 3 C's. I just made that up on the spot. That's pretty good. I might write that down and coin that. I love how my brain works. So the other thing is, so the connection part is really important. Focus and your dog wanting to be near you. That is the key to lead skills. And this kind of but it's bordered into a bit of a lead topic conversation. Oh well. So I love lead work. You've probably heard me mention it. It's my favourite thing to work on, and it just gives me so much joy to see dogs learning how to walk nicely on the lead and to go from pulling to not pulling. It's all about the connection and the engagement and the relationship between you and your dog, not the lead and the harness, because they are very, very. We think it's the lead that makes our dog walk nicely, but it's not. The lead is just a safety tool. So have a look at your harnesses. Have a look at your collar. What are you using? Ask yourself, what am I using? How does it work? Why does it work? Is there a better option? And hopefully this podcast has made you think twice about the fact that harnesses make dogs pull, because they absolutely don't. If you've got any questions, please let me know. If you would like to have us have a little look at your harness, if you're a regular who we see in person, next time, just say, what do you think of my harness? I'll give you an honest opinion. If not, join our Facebook community group, post a picture of your dog in a harness and say, is this harness a good harness? And we'll give you our feedback. Have a wonderful week, and I'll catch up with you really soon. Thank you for listening to The Dynamic Dog Owner with me, Debbie Potter. See you next time.